Hello everyone, welcome to Hebrew 2. My name is Dave Wyant. I am your teaching assistant for this semester. In this video we'll be looking at Weingreen chapter 50, Stative Verbs. Let's get started with a classification of Hebrew verbs. The vast majority of Hebrew verbs consist of a three-consonant root that carries the meaning of the verb. Verbs are classified by their second stem vowel. Shamer, he kept, is an A-class verb as indicated by the second stem consonant, patha. Kaved, he was heavy, is an E-class verb as indicated by the second stem vowel, tseri. Katon, he was small, is an O-class verb as indicated by the second stem vowel, holem. As a general rule, E-class verbs and O-class verbs are what are known as stative verbs. Stative verbs indicate states of being rather than verbs of action. However, there are some A-class verbs that can be stative. For example, shakav means he slept. The important thing to be aware of with these stative verbs is that the second stem vowel is altered in the conjugation of O-class and E-class stative verbs. And we'll look at those conjugations and how they are formed in this presentation. In the conjugation of E-class stative verbs, in the imperfect conjugation, the second stem vowel is an A, not an O. Remember our paradigmatic verb shamer, and remember when we took it over into the imperfect, shamer went to yishmor. Well, that change of the second stem vowel from a patha to a holem does not occur with these E-class stative verbs. The second stem vowel is an A in the imperfect conjugation, not an O. In the imperative conjugation, the second stem vowel is also an A, not an O. And of course, that's because what happens in the imperfect also happens in the imperative because the imperative is formed from the imperfect. So in the imperative, the second stem vowel is an A, not the expected O. In the perfect conjugation, the stem vowel is an A, not an E. The third person masculine singular form is kaved, but that tsere, that second stem vowel tsere, an E-class vowel, is not maintained throughout the perfect conjugation. And again, we'll see that as we go through this presentation. However, in the participle, the E-class vowel is maintained throughout the conjugation of the participle. There's a couple of forms that are a little bit tricky to take note of. The participle masculine singular is identical in form to the cal-perfect third person masculine singular, kaved. And context determines how to parse the form. And a second one that's tricky is the participle feminine singular, keveda, is very similar in form to the cal-perfect third person feminine singular, kaveda. Okay, let's go ahead and look at a comparison of the imperfect conjugation of kaved with shamer. We'll look at these two verbs side by side and see how they conjugate. Of course, shamer is an A-class verb as indicated by the second stem vowel patha, and kaved is an E-class vowel as indicated by the tsere underneath of the bait. And so it is a stative verb. When we take shamer into the imperfect, the third person masculine singular form goes to yishmor, and so the patha goes to a holem in the second stem vowel. But that does not happen with these E-class stative verbs in the imperfect. In the imperfect, the third person masculine singular form is yikbad, as indicated by this patha. It's not a holum. So you see the A-class vowel replaces the O-class vowel. In the third person feminine singular, shamer goes to tishmor, but in the E-class vowel, the second stem consonant is a patha, and so the form is tikbad. Same exact form for the second person masculine singular, tishmor. We might expect tikbod, but it's not. It's tikbad. We don't see it here in the second person feminine singular, tishmari and tikbadi, but we do see it here in the first person common singular. Shamer goes to eshmor, but kaved goes to ekbad. And again, we have this patha as the second stem vowel. We don't see it in the third person masculine plural, yishmaru and yikbedu, but we do see it in the third person feminine plural. Tishmorna goes to tikbadna, and again, rather than a holum here under the second root consonant, we have a patha. We don't see it in this form, tishmaru, but we do, or tikbedu, but we do see it in tishmorna. Rather than a holum, we have a patha in this form, tikbadna. And nishmor goes to nikbad. Now you have to be very careful with this first person common plural form of the E-class stative verb, because if you saw this form in the text, what might you think that is? Try and parse this, and if you didn't know what it was, what would you be tempted to parse it as? It's got a noon prefix here with a hirik, a schwa, and a patha. Doesn't that look like a nifal perfect third person masculine singular? It does, doesn't it? But it is not. It is an imperfect first person common plural of an E-class stative verb. Not a nifal perfect third person masculine singular. The forms are identical. You just need to be aware of that. Okay, that was the imperfect conjugation of an E-class vowel. Let's look at the imperative conjugation of an E-class vowel, kaved, and we'll compare it with shamer. And of course, because the same things happen in the imperative that happen in the imperfect, we'll expect similarities here because the imperative conjugation is formed from the imperfect conjugation. Our very familiar second person masculine singular imperative, shemor, in the E-class vowel goes to kevad. And again, you see, we might expect kevod, but because this is an E-class stative verb, the expected O class goes to an A class. It's kavad. We don't see it here in the next two forms, the second person feminine singular imperative and the second person masculine plural. We don't see that conversion, but we do see it in the second person feminine plural. Shemorna goes to kevadna. And again, we might be expecting kevodna in the imperative, but because this is an E-class stative verb, that holum is converted to a patha. Okay. Now, moving from the imperative conjugation to the perfect conjugation, we want to compare a regular A-class vowel with an E-class, a second stem E-class vowel, a stative verb. And what we see in the third person masculine singular is that E-class, that E-class vowel is a second stem vowel, kaved, compared with shamer, but that E-class is only in that third person masculine singular. We don't see it in the third person feminine singular, but here in the second person masculine singular, we're going to see that this tsere from kaved is converted to an A-class, a patha. So it's kavadta, and that compares very similarly with shamerta. Same thing in the second person feminine singular, kavadte. We have the patha here. So you see the tsere in the third person masculine singular goes to a patha. Compares very similarly with shamert. Same thing in kavadti, the first person common singular, we have a patha as the second stem vowel. Shamerti. And this is just a feature of these E-class stative verbs. We don't see it here, kavedu, but we do see it in kavadtem. We see the patha under the second root consonant. Compares very similarly with shamertem. Same thing for the second person feminine plural, kavadtem. Again, we have the patha. And in the first person common plural, again. So the patha runs all the way through the perfect conjugation as the second stem vowel. It's only in the third person masculine singular that we see the tsere. Okay. Now let's look at the participle, and we'll compare an A-class vowel shamer with our E-class vowel kaved. And what we see here is the rule is that the E-class vowel maintains its way all the way throughout the participle. So shamer and kaved, remember this is the one that we said was the identical form to the third person masculine singular perfect. And context will be the determining factor as to how to parse that. Shomra or shomereth is our participle feminine singular, and with kaved, the E-class is maintained throughout the paradigm. Kaveda. Shomrim, we have kevedim for the masculine plural, and shomroth compares kevedoth with the feminine plural participles. So the point of this slide here is that the tsere, the E stem vowel, is maintained throughout the participle. Again, note that the participle masculine singular is identical in form to the cow-perfect third person masculine singular, kaved, and context determines how to parse it. And again, once again, the participle feminine singular, keveda, is very similar in form to the cow-perfect third person feminine singular, kaveda. That should be a hey there, not a hate. Okay, those were the conjugations of the E-class stative verbs. Let's look now at the conjugation of O-class stative verbs. In the imperfect conjugation, the second stem vowel is an A rather than the expected O. And this is the exact same rule. It's just like with the E-class stative verb. The second stem vowel is an A rather than the expected O in the imperfect. In the imperative conjugation, the second stem vowel is an A rather than the expected O. And again, this is just like with the E-class stative verb. And that is obviously because what happens in the imperfect also happens in the imperative, because the imperative is formed from the imperfect. So the second stem vowel is an A rather than an O. In the perfect conjugation, the second stem vowel maintains its O-class vowel throughout. So let's go ahead and look at a comparison of shamer, an A-class verb, with katon, an O-class stative verb, and we'll compare the imperfect conjugation of these two verbs. Our familiar paradigmatic verb shamer in the imperfect third person masculine singular goes to yishmor. However, the O-class stative verb katon shifts to an A-class second stem vowel of patha, and it goes to yiktan. See the patha there underneath of the second root consonant. Tishmor, the third person feminine singular, goes to tiktan. Tishmor, again, same form, goes to tiktan. Tishmari, we don't see it in this form, goes to tiktani, but we do see it in the first person common singular. Eshmor goes to ektan, and again, we see that instead of the expected holum under the second, above the second root consonant, we have a patha as the second stem vowel. Yishmaru, we don't see it happening in this form, yiktanu, but we do see it in the third person feminine plural, tishmorna. When we look at it in katon, it goes to tiktanna. And so again, we have the patha as the second root vowel. Tishmaru, we don't see it in this form, tiktenu, but we do see it in tishmorna. The next form is tiktana. We see the patha here as the vowel under the second root consonant. And nishmor goes to niktan, and again the same. I have this highlighted here because the same warning goes for this form as well. If you just saw this form in the text, what might you think this is? You see the noon prefix here with the hirik, schwa, and patha, and it would be very tempting to parse this as a nifal perfect third person masculine singular, but it's not. It's actually, well, the forms are identical. It's just something to be aware of. I wanted to point that out. Okay, now let's look at the imperative, and we will compare the imperative of an A-class vowel with the imperative of an O-class stative verb. Here we have our familiar second person masculine singular imperative of shamer is shemor. But when we go to the O-class stative verb, we end up with katan as the second person masculine singular imperative form. And just like has happened in the imperfect, in the imperative, the second stem vowel has shifted from an O class vowel to an A class vowel, patha. We don't see this vowel shift occurring in the next two forms. The second person feminine singular of shamer is shimri, and the second person feminine singular imperative of katon is kitni. The second person masculine plural imperative of shamer is shimru, and the second person masculine plural imperative of katon is kitnu, but we don't see that vowel shift in these two forms. We do, however, see it in the second person feminine plural imperative of shamer is shemorna, and that holum vowel will shift from an O class vowel to an A class vowel, and we end up with katana. And again, the reason for that is that the imperative, as we know, is formed from the imperfect, and so the same things that happen in the imperfect will happen in the imperative as well. Okay, let's look at the perfect conjugation now. We'll compare again shamer, our A class vowel, with katon, our O class stative verb, in the perfect. And what we'll see here in the perfect is that with the O class vowels, the O is maintained throughout the perfect conjugation. There's no conversion to an A. So shamer and katon, shamera and katena, we don't see it in this form. Shamerta, see the O class is maintained in the perfect, and we get katonta. Shamert, and again the O class stays. Katont. Shamerti, katonti. There's no conversion of the holum to a patha in the perfect. Shameru, katenu, we don't see it in that form, but we do in the second person masculine plural. Shamertem. Now, be careful with this form. I've highlighted it for an important reason. Again, we said that the second stem vowel remains an O class vowel. And what we have here, you need to look very careful at the second syllable vowel here. What is that vowel? Is it a comet, or is it something else? It's not a comet, is it? It's actually a comet hatuf, an O class vowel. So that form is ketontem. So be careful with that one. That is an O class vowel there. Shemertem, we have the same issue with the second person feminine plural. Ketontem, that is in a closed unaccented syllable, therefore it's a comet hatuf, an O class vowel. The O class is maintained throughout the perfect paradigm, or the perfect conjugation of O class vowels. Shamernu and katonu. All right, so what have we learned? Well, first of all, we've seen that verbs are classified by their second stem vowel and are either A class, E class, or O class verbs. We've seen that E class verbs, as indicated by the tseri stem vowel, as well as O class verbs, are what are called stative verbs. Stative verbs describe a state of being as opposed to action or motion. And E class, we saw that E class and O class stative verbs are not conjugated normally. They do not maintain their second stem vowel. Both E class and O class verbs have both their imperfect and imperative conjugations in A rather than O. So in other words, we have yikbad instead of yikbod, and we have yictan instead of, we might expect, yictone. We also learned that the perfect conjugation of E-class verbs also maintains a second stem A vowel. Kaved goes to kavadta. We learned that the perfect conjugation of O-class verbs, however, maintains its O-class second stem vowel throughout. So the O-class perfect maintains its O-class vowel throughout the perfect conjugation. There are some A-class verbs that are stative verbs, and shakav is the example. And these A-class stative verbs are conjugated normally. Okay, well, that's it for this presentation. Good job, keep up the good work, and happy studying.